great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.
So let's begin our conversation with 5 years ago, this pandemic was raging. We were a month into it. Lots of things were going away, lots of unknowns. Ultimately, living through that pandemic, how much of that has reverberated into your work and the way that you do things today?
Well, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't for the pandemic.
Yeah.
I had traveled around the world basically for 13 years, and I can tell you day by day. February 28th, 2020, I come home from my last international trip from Portugal. The next day, I get COVID. So I'm one of the OG COVID people. I had it the first week of March, and then I kind of get better. And then you keep hearing this stuff in the news of what was happening in Italy and China. And then they start shutting stuff down. And I work in the travel and tourism industry. And the entire industry basically went to zero. Like the industry, for all practical purposes, disappeared.
Yeah.
There were hotels that were housing nurses and stuff, but beyond that, there was no real travel going on. And I initially, like a lot of people, thought this would be done in a few weeks. And I started talking to some higher ups I know in the industry, and they were telling me, no, this is probably going to be years. And I realized I couldn't rely on the travel industry anymore. So I did a big pivot to podcasting instead of blogging and photography, and turned out to be probably the best move I've ever made in my life. But it probably wouldn't have happened without the pandemic.
So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do today. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids at career day, and it's fifth graders, and the kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer them?
To a bunch of fifth graders, I would say I have a podcast and I teach people something new every day. I have a lot of fifth graders that listen to my show. Um, my show is not for children, meaning it's not marketed as a children's show, but I keep it safe. I don't use any language, so it's child safe. Um, but I think that's why kids like it. Like kids don't want to listen to kid stuff,
Yeah,
and most children's educational stuff is like talking down to kids.
yeah,
Hey kids, today we're going to learn about this,
yeah.
and they're not talking to them about the Battle of Pharsalis or things like that. And these kids can handle this. And I get reviews. Like I just read one the other day. This kid was, I think, 11 years old, and he basically said 30% of what I know comes from this. I learned more from school than I do, or in your podcast than I do in school. And I've had many of those comments. But I also get truck drivers. I get uh, parents that listen with their kids in the morning or driving them to school. I got researchers at MIT, Oak Ridge National Labs. I did one episode on math, and I had a professor that emailed me saying, I'm using this episode as the introduction to uh, every one of my courses this semester. And so it's really all over the place because, yeah, it's something random and new every day in about 15 minutes.
So when you were a kid in that position at career day, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream life?
Oh, I probably would have said something like an astronaut.
Yeah, yeah,
I went through phases, where I was like really into the space program. I was obsessed about baseball. I could tell you the name of every member of the 500 home run club or the 3,000 hit club. I read voraciously, and I came from a household where, I often tell people, what were your, or I ask them, what was your parents' favorite book growing up? And I always say it's a trick question for me because I've never seen my parents read a book in my life. We had no books in my house, and I learned how to read before kindergarten by watching Sesame Street and the Electric Company.
oh wow,
So if I ever meet Morgan Friedman, I have to tell him thank you,
yeah,
because he was on the Electric Company when I was growing up teaching people how to read.
yeah.
Um, so that's yeah. I've never had I've never thought of myself as having a career. I've shifted gears so many times in my life, and I've never had a real job. Um, and what I'm doing right now, there's a lot of people that would like to be a podcaster, and at a certain level, it's very easy. You just start talking into a microphone. But what it required to be successful, I think most people are not willing to go through.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Take me back to your childhood. Are you originally from Wisconsin?
Yes.
Okay.
I made a conscious decision during the pandemic to return back to my hometown where I hadn't lived for 30 years or so.
Okay. So, what were these foundational elements in your youth, very early on, that were implanted into you that made you want to travel, this thirst for adventure, and then to eventually get into podcasting and storytelling?
My we never traveled much growing up. We'd occasionally go on a summer camping trip or something. I think I went to Canada once, and famously, I tell people that I never saw saltwater till I was 21 years old. But my dad, he subscribed to National Geographic, and I had an uncle who was a custodian at a local school, and he'd often bring back, old copies of National Geographic that they didn't want anymore, and I read those. And in fact, if you, I have one of the biggest collections of National
Oh,
Geographic
wow.
in the world today.
Wow.
Um, so kind of made up for it.
Yeah.
But I think that's where it came from. I never really did travel much, and I had an internet company that I started in the '90s. When I sold it to a big multinational firm, and I conned them into sending me on a trip around the world to talk to their offices about internet development. And so they sent me on a 3 week trip where I circumnavigated the globe. I went to Tokyo, Taipei, Singapore, Frankfurt, Brussels, Paris, and London. And that was the first time I'd ever been out of North America. It was a very eye-opening experience. And that kind of, I think, lit the fuse. Went on a few short trips after that. I did one to Iceland and another one as part of a research team when I went back to school and studied geology to go to Argentina. And then I just hatched the idea of selling my home and traveling around the world.
And you did it for 13 years?
I did it for about 10 years nonstop, meaning I didn't have a home. I just lived out of a bag. And then the last 3 years, I had an apartment and I was on the road about half the time.
So growing up, being, having your feet planted, roots growing, was it weird to be that transient and that nomadic, or did it just become a part of what you did and it was fine?
I can almost tell you the moment it happened. It was like the second week I was in my trip, and 2 weeks is about the length that most people would travel at most for a vacation.
Yeah.
And I was in Hawaii. I basically started by going west, and I was on the big island of Hawaii, and I was sitting at a picnic table, and I kind of had this thought that popped into my head, like about going home, and it dawned on me, I can't go home. I sold my home. It's gone. And it was at that moment I realized this is home. Wherever I am at that moment is home. And that was a huge mindset shift. And that was something that just kind of stuck with me. And so I never, even when I'm traveling now, uh, that still is kind of part of me. I can be comfortable where I am at that moment and not have to, oh, I really want to go home. I want to go sleep
Yeah.
in my bed. That doesn't really ever affect me.
So in that first real go around the globe, when you really first got out and started seeing the world, what was the first magical place that you saw that was unexpected, that you were like, wow, I can't believe that I'm looking at this and this is just the whole thing. What was that place?
Probably, well, the first place I visited outside of the United States in 2007 when I started was Tahiti. And this was very different than traveling for business because in every stop when I went around the world for that or the other things I did, there was always someone at the other end waiting for me.
Yeah.
Uh, some people, they were handling the affairs on the ground, or even when I went to Argentina, there was a group at Buenos Aires University that we worked with. This was just me on my own. And that was a little bit frightening at first. And Tahiti is not you know, that's a pretty safe and benign place to go.
Yeah.
And if I was to go and do the same thing again today, my heartbeat wouldn't even go up one beat a minute.
Yeah.
But they speak French, so it's a little bit more difficult to get around. And then from there, I went to Easter Island. That was one of the first stops I made because that's one of the only places you can get there from. And man, that was probably the first, simply because it was the first international stop of the trip.
Yeah.
And then the longer you're on the road, the more you kind of just get accustomed to life on the road and seeing new places. And it isn't always this sense of awe and wonder. Um, it is very much a non-glamorous lifestyle when you get right into it. Because when you look at, you're sleeping in a lot of times like a hostel or a guest house, the accommodations, it's not five-star accommodations because why spend all that money for one night when I could spend the same amount of money for 5 nights?
Yeah.
Which is really when you're on the road, what you're primarily concerned with. But those would probably be the first time, those first couple days when I was outside of the U.S. and you're in a different environment.
So was there an explorer, was there an adventurer that you looked up to, an inspirational force that helped you give you this thirst for going out to see the world?
Not any one person, no. Because to be completely honest, with a few exceptions, the type of people that did this sort of travel, like the people that were writing travelogues and doing television, they weren't doing what I was doing. They would go off on an assignment, shoot it, come home, and they might be gone for less than a week. They were fundamentally going on vacation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long-term travel. And I started doing this in 2007, before there was Instagram, before Twitter, even to be honest. Facebook, I think, still required invitations that you have a .edu email address. So social media wasn't really a thing. And since then, this sort of lifestyle has exploded. There's so many more people that are traveling around the world like this, or they live in a van, and they all like to share what they're doing on Instagram and YouTube. And that was not the case when I started. In fact, the number of people that were doing this globally that had their own website, we all kind of knew each other, and there weren't many.
So when you finally got back to Wisconsin and put your stake in the ground and you weren't traveling all the time, was there kind of I don't even know what you would call it, culture shock? Was there some kind of like motion sickness, some kind of thing where you were like, wow, I'm not doing this. I'm actually in a place and I'm grounded. Did you have to go through any kind of gestation period of getting used to that?
That didn't really happen until the pandemic
Yeah.
because I was still, even though I'd make stops in the US, I was still traveling. I did a lot of trips within the US. I still had a car, so I probably drove 40,000 miles, just trips around the US and Canada, visiting national parks and things like that. It did take a while. Like when the pandemic hit, I had a lot of stuff in storage that I only took out of storage this year. But I remember taking like the plates and the silverware that I had stored, and it was like I had hit pause on my life and now I was hitting play again. But so I didn't move back to Wisconsin right away. I lived in Minneapolis before I started traveling, and I moved back there where I lived for several years. And a lot of the friends, their lives went on. They got married, they had kids. Um, so I'm coming back, and you can't just start up a lot of things that you left behind again. Um, I think for the first year, I ate out every meal, which is what I was doing when I was traveling. I eventually realized this probably isn't the healthiest or most economical thing to do, and it took me a while to get back into a habit of cooking for myself, uh, which I enjoy doing. So yeah, there was a period of adjustment, and like I showed you all those National Geographics, those just came out of storage
Yeah.
within the last year
Wow.
uh, because they just sit on a shelf.
Yeah.
They don't, so I had no reason to really take them out. But I had a huge movie collection that I started collecting about 25 years ago when the DVD first came out, and I hadn't seen touched these movies in 15 years, and all of a sudden I realized, wow, I have a bunch of movies in an obsolete format. So I've kind of spent the last year updating a lot of that. Um, but yeah, it's been a process.
So you've gone around the world and seen all kinds of cultures and different people and different scenarios. What have you learned about the human condition? How much is your empathy and understanding of the human condition and where we're at? Does it make you more hopeful? Does it, how do you deal with that?
The average person, anywhere you go in the world, is kind of living the same life. Their foods might be different, their dress might be a little different, but they get up, they work, they care about their kids, and that's life. Um, Most of what we see on the news is not that
Yeah.
because average life is not newsworthy. And So yeah, I would say I'm hopeful. The things that are driving the world today are primarily technology. There's a lot that's happened. When I started traveling, the iPhone wasn't yet available.
Yeah.
It had been announced, but it wasn't in the stores yet when I started. And some of the things I've experienced revisiting places, a decade later with people with smartphones, it's totally different. People were just walking around with phones in front of their faces, literally. Um, Whereas before they didn't do that. They would walk around and savor it and look, but they weren't just trying to record everything.
Yeah. So, what's the one place that you've loved the most that you go back to or you want to go back to?
There is no one.
Yeah.
I get this question all the time, like there's one place, and there isn't one place. There are many great places. I don't think there's a single place I would never return to. Um, there are some places that are nice. Sydney, Auckland, Vancouver, all very nice cities. Singapore. Uh, I think it'd be great to spend a month maybe in Venice. I always enjoy visiting London, Paris, major cities like that. But then there's a lot of amazing places that are just out of the way. I spent 3 months in the city of Girona in Spain, north of Barcelona. Almost nobody knows about it. Everybody goes to Barcelona because that's what they know. But I was able to spend time in the smaller city. And, after a while, you become a regular at places. And it's amazing how quickly that can happen because I remember I spent a week in Aqaba in Jordan and like I just went to the same restaurant every day
Yeah.
because they had shawarma and fries and hummus. And by the third day, they knew what I was going to order, and I kind of became a regular. And uh, this place in Girona was a block or two from where I was living, and the restaurant was a cafe named after, it was called The River, named after the Bruce Springsteen song. The guy who owned the cafe was a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, loved all sorts of Americana, and the fact that I was American, he just thoroughly enjoyed and would love come talking to me every time I came in and stuff. Uh, and those are kind of experiences you don't really have when you're visiting the most popular areas.
Yeah. So I got I got stuck in Europe during September 11th. I was in the back of a water taxi and had to try to find my way back home. I was supposed to fly from Paris back to Kansas City and it didn't exist. So the next place I went to was Vernazza, which was Cinque Terre. Have you been there?
Cinque Terre, yeah.
Yeah. What'd you think?
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's crazy.
But it's gotten so popular.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people, social media has done a lot of this. They see these, very beautiful photos of places. Um, and so everybody flocks to the same place. And these places that are really busy, it's not like they're bad places. There's a reason why people are going there. And a lot of it's they're going to the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think Venice has actually put restrictions on the number of people that can enter the city. You have to sign up for it.
Yeah.
But that really is only the case in the summer. If you just don't go in the middle of the summer when everybody is traveling and go in like later September or May or something, then you can go to a lot of these places no problem. But yeah,
You know,
Cinque Terre is gorgeous.
yeah, yeah. I'd never have seen the skies the way I did when I got down to the water when it was just like the absence of light and I'm just looking out at the ocean. It was one of the most amazing things. And it was just fun. I mean, there was, you buy your own food, you do your own thing. They had that old school, that old world life there. It was just it was fun to see how that. And for all the places that I could have been on the planet after 9/11, that was quite a place to be at.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna get stuck,
Yeah.
um, I was when they had that Icelandic volcanic eruption. This is in 2010. I was stuck in Spain, and it was kind of a similar thing.
Yeah.
That well, you got to be stuck somewhere.
Yeah, you might as well. So let me ask you this. The one thing about getting into this realm of podcasting, as you very well know, it's a special realm. There's a lot of things that go into this. There's a lot of work in podcasting, but the benefits far outweigh it, and it's a wonderful world. What have you discovered about all of these journeys and these travels that you've taken all through all of these years that you have discovered based on you putting the stories out there, being a part of this podcasting world?
Podcasting. is probably the best media in terms of getting people to relate to you. So I had a blog. I've done all the social media stuff. I had big followings on all the social media platforms. But at the end of the day, people are just swiping, right?
Hmm.
Maybe if you're lucky, they may spend 10 seconds on a photo on Instagram. When I ask people, can you tell me the last 10 things you liked on social media? Most people can't.
Yeah.
But with a podcast, you're in their ear. You know, right? They're listening to you for an extended amount of time, far more than all the little quick hits that they're getting um, on social media. And they hear your voice, they can hear what you're saying, and more importantly, how you're saying it. And so you develop a tighter relationship. And shifting to podcasting from a world of blogging and social media, it's like night and day.
Yeah.
And I've been telling people this. It's like it's not only quantitatively better, but it's qualitatively better. And the other thing, just from a pure technical standpoint, everything in social media and the rest of our online world is all done through algorithms. So what we see is being fed to us by some computer program that is telling us, oh, you like this, so you'll like more of this. And you've probably experienced this. You watch some YouTube video about something you haven't watched, and the next thing you know, they're serving up a dozen more of the same thing. And it's like, yeah, I watched that one thing, but this is not my life
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
You don't have to do this. With podcasting, there really is no algorithm.
Right.
It's word of mouth, and it's the closest thing we have to the way the internet used to be. People subscribe. And just a good example, I have several friends who have popular YouTube channels. And when they got started, they would post a video, post another video, and then eventually they'll have one that took off. Uh, and the algorithm liked it. And so now they feel like, well, I got to do another video about that because that worked. And so they do it again and that works. And the next thing you know, their whole channel is about that thing.
Yeah.
With podcasting, it's not like that. And I get people that make suggestions to me all the time. Say, well, you should go to your analytics and find out what the most popular things are. And the answer is there isn't,
Yeah.
because there's no algorithm in terms of what people see. They just subscribe to the show and they get fed up every episode. So it's all pretty much the same. And just anecdotally, when I ask people, it's like all over the place. So it's a very different experience. I'm able to give people something in a, with a degree of serendipity where they don't know what tomorrow's show is going to be about. Um, and it's not just, well, you liked the last show, so here's more of the same thing. And that is lacking, I think, online today. And one of the reasons why I think podcasting has become uh, such an effective medium for people that choose to use it.
What was the first podcast you listened to? The first one that hooked you, that gave you that good feeling?
It would have had to have been, well, the very first one, it probably would have been the Napoleon podcast
Okay.
um, with um, Cameron. He's Australian. Uh, but there was the History of the Rome podcast, Econ Talk. These are all shows that launched like, 15 or more years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to podcasts. I had rented a camper van and I was running around Western Australia, and I'd listen to them at night or while I was driving because you really couldn't get any radio stations.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was your favorite camera when you were out traveling and really doing it in earnest? Did you have a favorite camera?
The last one that I was using was a Sony AR7 II, which was a mirrorless full frame camera that Sony made, and I was very pleased with it. I began shooting with a Nikon D200, which was their crop sensor
Yeah.
camera, and in low light, if I was shooting at ISO 800, I wouldn't be happy with the images. Maybe I could go back now and fix some of them with a lot of the good the denoiser programs out there. But 800 would be like the limit. I didn't even want to go to 800.
Yeah.
With the Sony, I could shoot at 3200 easily, probably even go up to 6400. So much so that I had a wide range where I didn't even care what the ISO was.
Yeah.
And so my ability to shoot in low light, which is one of the most important things I look at in terms of travel photography, because I don't have the ability to use a flash.
Yeah.
in most situations. If you're in a cathedral or you're at some sort of event or a ceremony, you can't be lugging them around, a flash.
Yeah.
So the ability to shoot in low light was really important, and that did a great job with it.
So, of all of these things and adventures that you've been on, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Going to South Georgia Island, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, that's a place that's between Africa and South America, above Antarctica. You cannot fly there. Uh, Usually about once or twice a season, ships that go to Antarctica from Ushuaia, Argentina, will stop there, and it's usually the highlight of the season for the crews that work on the ships.
Yeah.
And I was able to do that, which very few people get to do. I visited the island of St. Helena before the airport was built. That was a 5 day boat trip to get there.
Wow.
You'd have to take 5 days from Cape Town to get to St. Helena, and then 5 days back, and then you had to spend, at least a week on the island, um, just because of the boat schedule. But now you can fly there, and it's relatively easy to do.
Yeah.
Um, so probably those two things.
So, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, all of your listeners, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I don't spend much time worrying about that.
Yeah.
That's for other people to think about. I'm me. I'm just focusing on what I'm doing. Thinking about questions like that, I think, will ultimately get you nowhere. And you can think about what you want to be. Like, I want to be the guy that does this or that, um, or I want people to think of me a certain way. But again, that's ultimately in their hands. You have to ultimately deliver on what you want to be.
You know, I mentioned being over in Europe on 9/11. Was there a time where you traveled where you accidentally got wrapped up into some kind of world event that was going on that just kind of deviated from you just purely traveling and it turned into a whole other like sub story?
I wasn't wrapped up into it, but I was certainly had a front row seat for it. A couple of them. I was in East Timor the day there was an assassination attempt on the president and the prime minister, and it was it must have happened early in the morning on the day I was leaving, and I was at this guest house and I got a taxi, and there was something happening. I didn't know what it was because even if I was watching the news, it would have been in Portuguese or Bahasa, and I wouldn't have understood it.
Yeah.
So I get in the taxi, and the taxi driver just makes a gun thing with his finger, and he goes, "Bang, bang, very bad, very bad." And I didn't know what he meant. I assumed that there was a shooting. I get to the airport, crawling with Australian peacekeepers. It wasn't until we landed, so we went from Dili to Darwin in Australia, and a policeman approached the plane. It wasn't a very big plane. And as we got out, he notified us of what had happened. He said that the president and the prime minister had been killed. They weren't, they were shot, but they didn't die. He said, if anybody knows anything, please contact the authorities, et cetera, et cetera. So that was interesting. And then in 2010, I was in Bangkok, and they had these big red shirt protests. And there was one day these were hundreds of thousands of people protesting the government. And one day they were going to come protest the prime minister's house, which was a couple blocks from where I was staying. So I'm like, I want to go check this out. So I take my camera, and there are thousands of angry protesters on one end of the street, at the end of the street where the prime minister's house is, and hundreds of cops in full riot gear, helmets, shields, batons, and I'm between them with my camera. Um, and it was very exhilarating. I felt that I probably wasn't in danger. And I later found out I really wasn't in danger at all because the cops kind of sympathized with the protesters. Um, but I felt there was a 10% chance, something could happen, go down. But I got some fantastic photos, and they just kind of marched down the street, and the police backed up until they got to the prime minister's house. And they had taken, uh, thousands of people had donated blood, and they put the blood in plastic jars like that normally had water. And they carried this blood down to the prime minister's house where they dumped it out. And I guess there was a journalist that later took a sample of the blood and tested it, and it had everything because it was the blood of like thousands of people all mixed together. It had HIV, hepatitis, you name it, like every disease running down into the drain.
I can't. That the visual of that is unreal, absolutely unreal. So I'm curious. With your podcast, you had mentioned the kids learning a lot, and you're hitting a lot of people out there. What has been your favorite fan letter, favorite response?
I had one a man who said he lost his daughter and he got through it by listening to my show. I never expected something like that. But I mean, I get so many like every week that of like I'm really I sit here in the chair I'm sitting in and I'll think of a show idea and I go sit on the couch and I write it on my laptop and then I record it. And this is just me in my own little world. And to realize that when I hit publish and it goes out, there are tens of thousands of people that are hearing this and that's actually making a difference in a lot of people's lives is something that is you kind of have to get your head around it because in a way you can almost be disconnected from the entire process. I've only had it happen once and it was rather recently where somebody recognized me from my voice.
Wow.
I was at a store and they're like, "Are you Gary?" It's like, "Yeah." It's like, "Oh, I'm a big fan of the podcast." I'm like, "Oh, thanks."
That's awesome. So everything everywhere is the podcast. It's on all major platforms. If
It's
anybody
everywhere.
wants, yeah. So if anybody wants to delve into your world more, see your previous adventures, anything else in your world, where can they go?
Wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, just search for Everything Everywhere Daily.
Okay, excellent, Gary. This has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thanks
Best
for
of
having
luck.
me.
Continued success.
All right.
Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.